Welcome to Bookmarked. My name is Lee, and this morning in the studios is Kiran Vas, ADHD. The book is called Perfectly Imperfect: How ADHD Can Inspire Leaders and Entrepreneurs to Burn Brighter and Not Burn Out. Now, Kiran, you're a successful entrepreneur from Bangalore as well, and you stay right now in Denmark, right? You went to the school, St. Joseph's High School. My competition actually from FAPS and Joseph's. So, welcome to Studios Radio 1. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well, Lee. Thank you for having me over here. And I really look forward to having a nice chat with you today.
First off, I want to get a address to what ADHD is, to you. You've been through ADHD, you have ADHD. Can you describe your experience with ADHD and what was the moment you realized that, okay, I need some help? What was that defining point in your life?
Yeah. So ADHD is attention deficiency hyperactive syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And I think every naughty boy in school at some point
Probably
of time
had it, yeah.
probably had it or sort of displayed some attributes of it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I learned when I was diagnosed with ADHD is if these attributes in your life affect your normal functioning as a person for more than 6 months.
Okay.
Right? So it did for me. So, I was diagnosed with anxiety, with stress, with depression. And at that point of time, after 6 months, I knew I needed help. And I was lucky to get a psychiatrist in Denmark. And she was, very, very good to identify what I am good at and what was my weaknesses.
Right.
And through a very structured process over 15 days to 21 days, she and me diagnosed ADHD, which basically has changed my life, Lee.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so glad you've come from that and you've successfully moved on from that diagnosis, not weighing you down and putting you down. And the book is I've read part of the book, and I got so many interesting concepts such as an ice pack, right? So for the listeners and viewers out there, can you describe what an ice pack is and how do we use an ice pack?
Yeah. So an ice pack stands for imagine, create, and execute.
Lovely.
So I've been in the corporate world as an entrepreneur, as a leader for about, 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
So my execution skills are very, very powerful. So you give me a project, I can execute it spot on, right? I can manage big projects, complex projects, global projects all over the world. I can imagine.
Amazing.
I can execute on it and very, very successfully. Imagination, I've got what my friends call a fertile imagination. Right? So sometimes I can see things from different angles which people say, Kiran, how do you imagine this sort of stuff, right? So I'm born with a fertile imagination. I can take a word, and as in the book, I use a lot of metaphors. I can do a lot of spin on it. I can tell a lot of stories on it. But what I was not really good at for 35 years was the creativity part. I never imagined I could create something, right? Because my whole life I worked, right? The only thing I did was work hard. So I never created. Also at work, I probably created my partner's dream or, my wife's dream or my son's dream or the principal's dream. So I was always creating
For other people.
Right. So when I was undergoing my sort of recovery after my diagnosis of ADHD, which it took me about 6 months to accept, right? I said, I want to create something, right? And this is where I asked myself, Kiran, what are your hobbies and what are your passions?
Right.
Two very difficult questions for somebody like me to answer. Hobbies, I had none, right? Because I worked. But very, very soon I found out, but you love to cook. I'm a really good cook, right? I love to eat, right? Because when I eat like a baby. The food is like all over my face, but I enjoy it. And my wife says, how the hell do you enjoy your food so much? So she can just sit and watch me eat. And the last thing is the daddy jokes.
Right.
I just love creating jokes.
Dad jokes.
Yeah. Right? Because some of them irritate my children. Some of them, they accept it. But for me, quickly, I found out that a source of smiles for me was cooking, eating, and what I call laughing. Because when I was going through my diagnosis, I called myself a smileless pauper. I couldn't find a simple smile inside me. And for everybody who knows me for the last 50-something years, they always will sort of relate to me because of my mischievous smile.
Love it.
So the word smileless pauper was me desperately trying to find a source of smiles. And the other thing which I use is passions. I'm a very passionate leader. I'm a very passionate entrepreneur. And when I wrote the book, I was extremely passionate about ADHD because I found out if you use the treatment and the processes and the structures to flourish as somebody with ADHD, you can create amazing things. So for me, my creativity came with Perfectly Imperfect. It took me 2 years to do it, to write it, to get a team to produce it, to get a graphic illustrator to illustrate my thoughts. And this is where, for me, the creativity part came. And for whatever I do for the rest of my life, it will follow this chain. Imagine, create, and execute. Because if you can't execute, you're never going to be a successful leader or an entrepreneur. You will have like tons of ideas, tons of stuff which you do, but it's the execution which counts. This is where you make your money. This is where you get your product out. And a challenge for people like us is I get 5 ideas every day. Right? What do I focus on?
How do you execute that ideas? Yeah.
Yes.
Which one do you choose to focus on? Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And in the book, I have a number of filters, a number of models which I share to say, okay, every, let's say 2 days or 3 days, why don't you sit down in a quiet place, look the ideas through, talk to people who know about it. And when you get this feedback, then you know, okay, you're on the right path.
Right.
And I'm blessed to have a number of leaders and entrepreneurs working alongside me who like the work I do. And it's easy for me to reach out and say, I've got this idea.
Amazing.
What should we do with it? And these guys can make a simple calculation and say, Kiran, it's not going to work, or Kiran, it's going to work.
Right.
And it was through one of these conversations, I set this goal for myself to create 1 billion smiles every day.
Amazing. So now my other question would be, is this book for people who have ADHD, or is it for people who can learn from ADHD? Is it for both?
Yeah, it's for both.
Right.
So I think people, a lot of leaders and entrepreneurs who read the book or who read my website, in the first 15 minutes they say, wow, do I have ADHD? Right? It's because it's so common.
Relatable.
It's so relatable.
Yes.
Right? So I really think that, anybody who wants to understand more about ADHD or understand more about him or herself, I think that's a perfect book, for them. But I think it's also important for like the parents or the spouses to understand, right? This is a brilliant mind. Right? This mind can do amazing things. How do we nurture? How do we support this mind to flourish? Because if a person with ADHD doesn't get the support, at least in my case, I can be very open and say, without the support of my wife and my family and a good doctor and a psychiatrist, I would not flourish. I would still be struggling, right? And it's the support system which is very, very important.
So it's for everyone basically. Like there's a book for people who want to know more about ADHD, and who have ADHD can definitely relate more to this book as well.
Yeah,
right.
Because like I said, the book has like ADHD, leadership, and entrepreneurship, but you can switch these 3 words out with anything else.
Right.
So you could switch ADHD out with, let's say, fear of flying. You could switch entrepreneurship out with, let's say, being a mother. Right. So what I'm saying is leadership, hobbies, and passions is what will get you, going again to achieve amazing things.
Awesome. And there are some concepts discussed, such as Oism, and there are some characters in this book as well. If only, and multiple other, characters in this book. Can you explain what Oism is to us so that we get a better understanding about it before we read the book?
Yeah, sure. So this word O, yes,
yeah,
O-H-O, or like we say Ayo, right?
right.
So everybody who knows me for many years,
right.
They say, okay, when I say the word O, and depending how I say it, is Kiran is going to do some amazing things, right? Or if I say like O in a different way, they know, okay, wow, Kiran has done something which, it's going to cause like a negative effect on the family and our friends circle around him, right?
Right.
So when I was going through, my sort of grieving process, I found out, right, it was this character O, which was the essence of Kiran. Right? So when I say O, like in the book, I have 3 versions of O. One is called like O yes, O yes, and O yes. So that's like O yes is like, okay, I'm going to fly a kite. I'm going to fly, have some fun. And O yes is like, wow, I've done great in a project. So the smiles are going to last for 3-4 days. And O yes is like, wow, I've created a new company, or I've done something amazing, right? And O is part of me, right? So I said before, like I was a smileless pauper.
Right.
See, my journey to become a smiling billionaire, so that's a guy who creates 1 billion smiles every day, all centered around me finding this guy O. So in the book, I imagined somebody had captured O, who had been the driving force behind me for 54 years. Somebody had captured O. So now it was my responsibility to go out and find him, which is easy, to free him from these negative forces. Like it's literally like going on a hostage, project.
Right.
To free him, right, and get him back into my life. Bring him back into my life, right? Because the way I look at it was when I was grumpy, when I was anxious, when I was depressed, really didn't like Kiran. Because was used to the smiling Kiran.
Okay.
So when I was depressed or anxious, he didn't like me, so he ran away, right? So how do I bring him back into my life and tell him, something, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to be sad, that's part of me, but I need you by my side, right? So bringing him back to my life is very, very important, and keeping him till the day I die. So he's happy, he's the motor which drives me, is what I call Oism. So that's, how do I find, free, bring and keep this character O, which is described in the book in my life. That's called Oism.
Oism.
Yeah.
Amazing. I love it. I love the whole concept of how O is a person inside of you. I like that. It's lovely. Now, I want to bust some myths about ADHD this morning. I feel like the person who has ADHD definitely better understanding of what it is. Myth number one is ADHD isn't a real problem, right? It's, of course, a real problem. And can you bust a little bit more about it? Can you talk a little bit more about it?
So I think definitely ADHD is a real problem. I think there are different ways in which it manifests itself, right? In my case, it manifested itself at the periods where I was highly stressed, right? So I am what they called diagnosed as with adult ADHD.
Adult ADHD.
Right? So I was diagnosed at the age of 54 with ADHD, right? But I probably had ADHD as a child also.
Right.
But I didn't know it.
Right.
So my psychiatrist told me was that ADHD, it goes dominant for many, many years, but there would be some episode which makes it sort of, exhibit the negative parts of ADHD come out, right?
Right.
I went through a highly stressed period in 2018, when we started a new company, etc. And her hypothesis is that at this point of time, my ADHD, problems and the problems, which come with ADHD begin to come out again.
Right.
And her explanation to me was structure, right? So ever since I was young, I may have been the naughtiest or second naughtiest boy in the class, but it was very structured. Okay. So my father was very structured. Kiran, get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Kiran, do this, do that, eat on time. School, St. Joseph's, very structured.
Right, yes.
Right? I joined the Merchant Navy. Everybody else wanted to do something else. I joined the Merchant Navy. So on a ship, it's very, very structured.
Yeah, routine is essential.
It's routine, right?
Yeah.
At home, my wife is very, very structured. So the structure is what has helped me, flourish unconsciously with ADHD.
Okay, yes. Interesting. Myth number 2 is people with ADHD just need to try harder. True or not? I don't think so, right?
Yeah, so my whole life, right? I mean, I've been trying harder, right? But I've probably been trying harder at the wrong things. Right. So the other day, I spent 3 days on an estate with somebody, and the thing which I learned from him was monkey see, monkey do.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what I probably did. Right. Everybody does this. Kiran, you do this, but I never question. Why am I doing this? Does it make me smile? So if I try harder, it's going to burn me out because I am susceptible to burning out. It's one of my vulnerabilities which I've learned through the process I'm going through, is that I will always be subject to burnout, anxiety, depression if I'm doing the wrong things, if they don't excite me. And I'm privileged to be able to to focus on on the work I do because I worked hard for 35 years.
Right.
But I think the myth of working harder may or may not work, but I think it's also to get this diagnosis of ADHD as soon as possible. Because if you get it at an earlier age, then you know what makes you tick, right? And the stuff which doesn't make you tick, you could probably, if you have the luxury, give it to somebody else, or the boring stuff, give it to somebody else. Because like I say, at the end of the day, we have to put food on the table. Right. And if working hard puts food on the table, that's an option. But finding your passion, finding your creativity, which comes with the ADHD mind, is probably a way to work smarter.
Amazing.
Yeah,
I love it. The last myth I want to bust this morning is that people with ADHD can't focus ever. That's again a huge myth, I'm sure, right?
Yeah. Well, it took me 2 years to write a book. And that's probably the hardest thing somebody with ADHD could ever do, is to sit down and write a book. But this is where the stuff of hyper-focus comes in.
Right.
So, if I focus on something which interests me, I'm going to go as deep in as possible. Right?
Yeah.
And if you come and have a chat with me and the stuff you say doesn't interest me, you're going to lose me in 2 minutes. And that's typical of ADHD. So I use what I call, instead of attention deficiency, I call it attention efficiency instead of hyper-focus. Because if I use my attention correctly and efficiently, I can create amazing things like Perfectly Imperfect.
Amazing. I think I know what you mean by hyper-focus, because I do that as well at times, where if it doesn't really interest me, you've lost me. The more I keep trying and I never get that concept. But if it's something very interesting, like I can finish a book sometimes in like 3 days, 4 days, if it's like super, interesting, if I have nothing else going on in my life, and in 3 days I'm finished the book. But if there's other things happening in my life, or if the book is very, very draggy, it'll take me 3 years sometimes. I still have books on my shelf that I just like half written, because half, read, because I just can't get through it. It just doesn't tick at times. It's very, very frustrating.
True.
But, I also want to ask you your last question. My last question is, why should one read Perfectly Imperfect? For any means, why should they read it?
Number one, I think it's a book filled with a lot of lessons, both good and bad, but I show the positive sides of myself. I show my vulnerabilities. I'm very open about it. I want to inspire people. And I've created this magical universe called Hollandia, right? So Hollandia is like a place in my mind, or in my body, in which I've created these 31 pixies, right? And each pixie is so relatable, right? And what I've done is I have literally coded, right, years and years of knowledge from my parents, my grandparents, from my teachers, into each and every pixie, which is, for example, I've got this pixie called Mr. If Only.
Yeah, I think
right?
So. Let me find that if I can. Keep going.
Yeah, and Mr. If Only is like so beautiful, because there are so many of us who have the potential to be an entrepreneur. We say, if only I had taken this idea and executed on it, instead of just sitting on the couch and not doing anything about it, right? So again, Mr. If Only is like a beautiful pixie for young entrepreneurs to say, okay, every time I have this idea, let me bring Mr. If Only out and go for a walk or talk with him, because then he will actually tell me, okay, does this idea make sense or not? So it's about 31 beautiful pixies in this world of Hollandia, which anybody can create, because Hollandia for me is what happens in my mind and my body. This is where O is flourishing. This is where I have my pixies, where I literally go on walks with them, like talking to them on my shoulders, because these are my best friends, right? So it's a very powerful universe over there. And last but not the least, it's filled with humor. It's the only thing is I use a bit of corporate language, business language, which is basically my strength. So I literally go in and say, okay, measure your smiles. So I have like a smile and grimace profit and loss statement. Right. I have my take on net worth. I call it nut worth. So what is your nut worth? Right. Because as part of my process, I found out when there are 4 attributes in my life which are in balance. I smile more than I grimace. One is my physical health. So, walk. So all your numbers are good.
Right.
The financial part, make sure you use your finances properly. The third is the mental health part, which, I never sort of used or focused on for 54 years. But working on my mental health has been one of the greatest gifts I have to come out of stress and anxiety, depression, etc. And the fourth is what I call social wealth. Because my life was surrounded by, let's say, 1,000 people, all sucking the energy out of me. So I call them in the book leeches and chattering monkeys. Right? So they were sucking the energy out of me. But as part of this process, I came down to around 150 people, right, who I call like the onion rings. So people who will be there for me when I need help, and people who I should be there when they need help.
Right.
So there are some beautiful concepts in the book, highly relatable to any aspect of your life. And for me, this book is something you keep by your bedside, because next year when you pick it up and you're going through a different journey, or an odyssey, as I call it, in your life, it will mean something different to you, right? So pick it up. It's a well-written book because it's professionally made. I've got a team from the US, the best editors to help me to do it, and just have fun with it, because I just want to create a billion smiles. And Lee, Please help me.
You've made definitely. I'm smiling for sure. So you already won. You can take that one off as well. Where can they buy this book if they want the book?
Yeah, so the book is available on your local Amazon store, Amazon India, for example, and I think it's also on Flipkart.
Perfect.
And please enjoy it, and please also follow my website www.kiranvas.com, where I have some really beautiful blogs. I have 10-minute podcast with my wife.
Lovely.
Where we just talk about the different concepts, and it also shares my vision of what I want to do with this book and how I want to create 1 billion smiles.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to definitely help you on that journey to create 1 billion smiles. The book is called Perfectly Imperfect, How ADHD can inspire leaders and entrepreneurs to burn brighter and not burn out. Kiran Vas, thank you once again for coming to the studios and talking to me more about your book and your journey with ADHD. Definitely, I'm sure a lot of people related to this morning, and will definitely get more inspired to pick up this book and smile about it and learn more about your concepts. Thank you once again and have a nice day.
Thank you, Lee, and have a nice day too.
Perfect. All right.